Hello everybody, another video today, and this is a little bit of an interesting one. In my channel I have a lot of videos about Proxmox. I love using Proxmox. I use it at home. I use it for my customers, and Proxmox has been nothing but a absolutely fantastic virtualization platform. Granted, it's not perfect. I don't think any piece of software out there is perfect, but considering the price, which is free, it is exceptionally good. As you know, a lot of YouTubers out there post videos on home lab, home services, things like that, and rightfully so, it excites a lot of people. A lot of people would like to get their hands dirty in the home lab environment, whether it be for learning or it be for actual things they need to do. For example, Nextcloud is an option, right? So if you want to have your own private cloud, uh, Proxmox and Nextcloud container is a no-brainer. Then we have home automation, so Home Assistant. I use Home Assistant quite a lot. Granted, I'm not an expert in it, but I do use it to, automate a couple of things. One example is my main door porch lights. I have two of them. They're Philips hues, and I have a Home Assistant automatically turn on the lights at dusk, right? I mean, maybe about 10-15 minutes before dusk, and then shut them off about 10 or 15 minutes after dawn, right? So as you know, dusk and dawn does change. The time does shift, to and fro throughout the year. The beauty is that this system is automated now, and it pretty much just works. So things like that. So a lot of people are interested in setting up a home server, and to that end, I get a fair bit of emails through my YouTube channel. People asking me for hardware advice. What do they need to do? What do they need to get? What kind of hardware they need for a home automation or a Proxmox server? And the main story is that less is more. So a lot of these YouTubers, as I mentioned, do a lot of videos on home automation, or they're very savvy, IT savvy, especially when it comes at the home. Not straight product reviews, and a lot of people get excited and they want to do it. Now, these YouTubers, of course, might be sponsored by a particular OEM, or because of their YouTube channel source of revenue, they don't mind investing in pretty high-end hardware, for what it's worth, to set up a home lab. A lot of people also point viewers of their respective channels to move to, or procure rather, an old Dell server, right? Or an HP server, and they say, yeah, use that, and that's a good easy way to kind of get your feet dirty with home labbing. And I'll be honest with you, I mean, I also do have a Dell R620 server. It's a dual core Xeon, 128 gigs of RAM, all that nice stuff, but it is currently turned off and doing nothing at this present moment. The reason being is that while yes, it is a server at the end of the day, it's meant to be run 24/7, robust. It's got IPMI, all these nice things. Hardware RAID controller. The NICs on there are good, high quality NICs that can basically pump out data 24/7 without skipping a beat. The biggest issue for me was three things. Okay, one was of course the noise, but with Dell servers, you can use the IPMI to kind of scale the noise down. So the noise was mitigated to a certain degree. The heat. Now, this servers, they are definitely power hungry. They pump out a fair bit of heat, and it was warming up my basement. I had it in my basement. Basements are cool, generally speaking, so I had it there. But even despite being in the basement, especially in the summer months, I would feel that the basement is excessively warm. The third thing is, of course, power consumption and at the end of the day, your power or utility bill. Um, Running that server for me would easily cost me about, depending on the workload and what I was doing, you know, uh, 30 to like 60, $70 a month just for that one machine. And it was quite excessive. Uh, that's one thing. Now, the second thing is that with so much compute power, unless you are really utilizing that compute power or have a valid and genuine need for that compute power, my server was pretty much sitting idle 99.8% of the times. Um, so I did do a lot of research, and I decided that going low power is the way to go for me. So let me give you an example of what I mean. So this is my server currently. It's a Intel NUC Extreme Edition. You can see it has a 8 core i7 6770 HQ CPU in there. And I do have 32 gigs of RAM installed on this NUC. You can see that with all my containers and VMs installed, pretty much at idle, it's barely cracking 5-10% of the CPU. I mean, even if I go to say for example a month maximum, I mean you can see here that yes, it does spike to 100%. These are usually reboots, or, as you can see here, even the network traffic is spiking because I do have backups to my NAS nightly for all my containers and VMs. So that's why it spikes up. But in general, if you sit and look at it, if I look at my day maximum, you can see that it's pretty much chilling at 5% utilization. Occasionally spikes up to 27 or even 44% utilization, but these are momentary spikes, right? Whether I'm doing an app update or updating Home Assistant, whatever it may be, right? So these are the type of things that cause a CPU spike. One thing I want to make really clear is that I have worked in enterprise environments, in data centers, in high capacity compute environments. You have to think of a CPU in a certain mindset. The mindset is that if your CPU is sitting idle, it's a waste of resources. If your CPU is above 50%, we're talking now. Your CPU, your server is actually doing meaningful work. Once it crosses 75% threshold of continuous or steady utilization, that's when you have to decide, okay, do I cluster it? Do I get another server, or do I upgrade my server to more compute capacity? So my rule of thumb is that I like to see my servers at somewhere between 30 to say 60% sustained utilization, giving room for those spikes here and there depending on usage. So again, you have to understand that like a server sitting idle here is honestly not really being utilized quite a lot. So when it comes to home server, honestly, I think that one has to really sit down and before even thinking of getting a server, really understand and kind of determine what their use cases will be. A lot of people, like I said, they just want software type of things. Some people want to virtualize pfSense, some sort of software firewall. Some people want to virtualize TrueNAS, and all of these are valid use cases. Now we can sit here and talk till our faces are blue about the pros and cons of doing, virtualize everything. I used to do that. So initially, when I first started off with Proxmox, I had it's a normal tower PC, right? I think I started off with a Athlon 2400, a Ryzen 2400 GE. Then I moved to a 3600. Then I moved to an Intel i5. I kind of played around with different hardware platforms, and I always had the issue where, let me give you a hypothetical scenario. Let's say you virtualize pfSense in Proxmox, and you virtualize, other stuff in Proxmox, whether it be, TrueNAS, whatever it is. The issue I found was is that if I had to do maintenance work on my Proxmox machine, that meant that my internet was down. Of course, the machine is shut down, the VM is shut down, and hence you have no internet because pfSense is not running. And being in a household with children who are constantly on the internet, and our internet consumption at home is quite hefty. I always felt pressure to get the server up and running really quickly because there were other people who relied on the internet, which was tied to that server. So I came to a realization very quickly that while pfSense is a outstanding virtualization environment, and yes, it can virtualize pfSense easily, and yes, it can virtualize this and that, whatnot. I realized that splitting your resources is the way to go. And to kind of prove that point, I'm going to give you an example of how it's done in the corporate world. Take, your network, for example. Your gateway is a separate machine, your firewall is a separate machine, your switches are, of course, separate, your access points are separate devices. And this way, everything is separate but cohesive and works together. And the beauty of that is that you can, mix and match and kind of like upgrade one thing without affecting the rest. So, for example, hypothetically speaking, you were in a corporate environment, a company environment, and you wanted to upgrade your access points. Guess what? You can unplug the access points. Your network's running fine, right? People who are on the wired network are still working fine. And then, you would have downtime for the wireless people who are using Wi-Fi. You'd upgrade the access point, some amount of downtime for the Wi-Fi users, but at least business doesn't stop completely during that period, right? I mean, people can always jack into the Ethernet, provided there is one, and use the internet that way. So, the corporate environment, again, it's always better to kind of not have that one box that does everything because, don't put all your eggs in one basket, because if that one basket breaks, then suddenly, guess what? All your assets and your eggs, so to speak, are broken, right? So it's better to carry multiple baskets with, smaller eggs in each one. This way, if one breaks, at least you have, other resources remaining that you could utilize. So after that, I decided, let me research on a nice low-powered machine. Now, granted, this isn't really the most efficient machine out there, but it is fairly efficient. It is much more efficient than my Dell server could ever dream of being. Just the fans on my Dell server probably consume more wattage than this, this NUC running at, full tilt. It's food for thought, right? So my genuine recommendation for a lot of people is start your virtualization journey small, start it modest, and grow from there. My take would be is the best server you have is what you have with you right now, meaning any excess. There's a lot of people who, for example, have older laptops that are too slow to run Windows and do their daily activities. Maybe they were Windows 7 laptops, and it's just sitting there in their closet or cupboard or somewhere gathering dust. That to me would be a prime candidate for a Proxmox server because you actually have the hardware or majority of it. You might need to do a couple of small things to it. So for example, upgrade the RAM to, I would say, minimum 16 gigs. 32 is, to me, I would consider 32 gigs to be the minimum, but 16, depending on you getting started and what you're actually doing, could be sufficient. And you would have to upgrade the hard drive if it's especially an old Windows 7 laptop to an SSD. 1 terabyte SSD is more than sufficient. You can get a decent one for $60, $70 these days. And the RAM again, 16 gigs or 32 gigs, $100, $120, something along those lines. And in under $150 or thereabouts, you actually could upgrade your laptop to a server. Another example would be that you have old desktops that are you're not using, that you haven't sold or haven't disposed of, that are gathering dust in your garage, cupboard, storage closet, wherever. And repurposing those is also a really good idea. Again, they do have older CPUs. They might have, Intel Gen 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, i3, i5s, who knows. I would say the main thing is pretty much just the storage and the RAM. Again, 16 gigs is absolute bare minimum. I would say it's really tight, won't allow you to do much, but it is doable. You can definitely manage with 16 gigs. 32 I think is a nice sweet spot. It's the minimum. And as far as storage is concerned, honestly, it really depends what you're doing, what kind of VMs and containers you will be running. But I would say 512 gigs or 500 gigs SSD is a good start, but 1 terabyte gives you, a comfortable amount of breathing room. So, and then the third option is, of course, is to hit your eBays or your Amazons and pick up older, those 1 liter tiny PCs, so your Lenovo Tinys or your HP Elite Desk Pro Desks, G2, G3s, or the Dell 1 liter Tinys. An example would be for example, let's go to Amazon. Let's just do something like this. Let's say HP Tiny PC. So there we go. Something like this, honestly, would be absolutely incredible to start off with, right? So let me look for a good spec here. That's something I would say is a good idea. There we go. So this is a little bit expensive for what it is, simply because it's an i7, but and it's a 6-core i7. But you can see here it's got 512 gig SSD, 16 gigs of memory, 419 Canadian dollars, a little bit on the pricey side. I would say, if you search around, you can find there we go. So here's another example. So there we go. So 16 gigs of RAM, 512 gig SSD. It's an i5 6700T in a HP Elite Desk G3 Mini. To me, these are honestly perfect Proxmox home servers. If you wanted, you could get 3 of these and create a proper Proxmox cluster, with live VM migrations between, the 3 machines. And again, you're distributing your resources across 3 machines. In the event one of the machines needs some work or needs to be replaced, you can always migrate your resources that were on that machine to the other 2 and kind of distribute it that way. Usually, I don't want to say usually, most of the time, I would say almost 99.9% of the time, these computers, from HP, Dell, Lenovo, since they're corporate, they don't use cheap quality NICs network cards. So the network cards here is usually Broadcom or Intel. I've seen it majority of the time as Intel, and that's a good thing. You want Intel network cards just because they're very well supported in Linux and Proxmox, and they work. They work well. They don't give any issues. You can, pump gigabit sustained through them, and they're not going to skip a beat. If you have Realtek, my opinion about Realtek is yes, they do work. They work well, but for mission critical situations, kind of sketchy, right? Can it really sustain gigabits of data 24/7? Maybe there'll be some issues here and there. Maybe the driver will crash. Maybe who knows what, right? Stick to Intel, stick to Broadcom. Intel's the king, but stick to the good network cards, and you should have the least amount of issues. But this is a perfect small Proxmox virtualization machine in my eyes. You can see here it's 218 Canadian dollars, 219. Let's round off to 220 Canadian dollars. That's about like what, 180, 190 US, something along those lines. There we go. For under 200 US dollars, you can get a really decent server to get started. And this video is about such a server. So I have a friend who comes over to my house, and he sees my server and what I do with Proxmox, and he really wants to do something similar at home and kind of get his hands wet with Proxmox and virtualization, and he wants to practice Proxmox and understand how to use it properly. So this video we're going to talk about his machine, which is exactly this machine, right? The only difference is that for the RAM he has, I think, 24 gigs. He has one stick of 16 and one stick of 8. So this machine, 16 gigs, he bought it, did come with one stick of 16. Surprisingly, there was another SODIMM slot open. And he had an 8 gig stick lying around, so we stuck it in there, and he now has 24 odd gigs of RAM.